So, ladies and gentlemen, there's been some interesting discussions going on our Facebook site, the Brunswick Independent Authors Association. My cousin Jimmy Harvey, who is a longtime volunteer and developer up the North Shore Way, Jacket River, Nash Creek, and one of the former writers for the New York Islanders online site, Joe Powers, both very interesting and learned individuals, were trying to convince me the other day that the Islander dynasty from 1980 to 1983 was the best of all time. Well, it's top five, but it's really not the best of all time. What people don't know about me, I know all the secrets of why the Islanders were the biggest chokers in the NHL in the late 1970s, not in the mid 70s. From the 78 and 79 season, this was a team that finally got a great player in Mike Bossy, had an outstanding offense. But for some reason, after taking Montreal to the limit, not to the limit, but within two games of defeating Montreal in the 77 NHL semifinals, for some reason, when he got into the 1978 playoffs, they totally lost their offensive mind against, of all teams, the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, the Toronto Maple Leafs of 77, 78 were a good team, but they're not considered a team that was ranked in the top five of the league that year. If anything, the Islanders were slight favorites to win the cup away from Montreal because of the great regular season they had. Now, let's just go over a little bit of the 77 78 Islanders just to remind people exactly how good they were and why I believe they choked in the playoffs. Now, in that season, they were first in the Patrick Division, first in the Campbell Conference with a very impressive 48 17 15 record with 334 goals scored with 210 against. Now, this was Bossy's first year after being drafted from the Laval National in the 77 draft. He had 53 goals, and of course, this was a big point season for Brian Trottier, who had a team leading 77 assists and a team leading 123 points. And that was the year they also picked up center John Tonelli, who was playing with the Houston Aeros at the time. But see, the Islanders that year, Al Arbor did a great job. And by the time that Toronto advanced past the round, what they call the preliminary round or round of three, everything seemed to be going good. In the first two games against Toronto in the quarterfinals, the won 4-1 and 3-2. Second game was tight in overtime. But we're noticing in the media and as fans of the Islanders, they weren't scoring to the level they did in the regular season. Now, this is a team that could have scored in bunches against kind of not say a mediocre defense like Toronto, but an inconsistent defense. For some reason, when he went back to Toronto, they were defeated 2-0 in Game 3 and lost 3-1 in Game 4. So they went back to the island and they were lucky enough to squeak out an overtime win to make it 3-2. But when he went back to Toronto, Toronto opened up offensively, winning a very convincing 5-2 victory against the Islanders to set up a very, very interesting Game 7. Now, Game 7 was the same thing. The Islanders couldn't score for some reason. They were missing chances. Billy Smith was the number one goalie, and Smith was consistent. But eventually ended up the game went into overtime with Toronto not really dominating the play, and a miscue in the Islanders' zone led to a helmeted. Well, I mean, not the helmeted, but he was wearing a kind of a jaw brace. Lanny McDonald probably scoring one of the biggest goals in Toronto history of the 1970s, and probably was their last gasp as a consistent franchise that year. Now we all know that Toronto went on to lose in four straight to Montreal in the semis. Montreal won in six games against the Islanders. Six games, won against six games against Boston in the finals. Now that year, the Islanders could have easily, with the right momentum, defeated Montreal in the semifinals or even the finals, depending. I forget the point spread, like who's playing who. But you got to understand, this is a team there. Just give you an example. You had Trottier, Bossy, and Gillis on their main line. Denny Potvin had 94 points, including 30 goals, all-star defenseman. Bobby Bourne had 30 goals. Billy Harris had 22 goals. Bobby Nystrom had 30 goals. And he had, still had, consistent defensive players like Lauren Henning, and J.P. Parise, Eddie Westfall was still around to give the strength, veteran strength on the bench. He had some veterans on defense like Eddie's brother Jean Potvin, and Billy Smith appeared to be the number one that he always thought it would be, even though Chico Resch got more games played that year. But we always wonder why a team chokes, and there's no other way to say it. This is the Toronto Maple Leafs, okay, of 1978. They would give up a lot of goals. The Islanders could barely score more than 3 or 4 goals against Toronto in the playoffs. Mike Palmateer was now no Ken Dryden. He was almost like a Brian Hayward style. When he had a good game, he had a good game. When he had a bad game, he had a bad game. But you look at that the next year, again, the Islanders couldn't get past the Rangers. Rangers played Montreal in the finals. Um, by the time 1980 came along, Montreal, Guy Lafleur getting injured, it was the right time for the Islanders. But did the inconsistency by the Islanders in the playoffs cost them 2 cups in '78 and '79? Well, six of one and a half dozen of the other. The Islanders could have easily won the 1979 Cup. I don't think the Rangers really could beat anybody but the Islanders that year. He never really showed up against Montreal, especially after winning game one. He had every opportunity to rebound, and he couldn't take it. But '78, you know, for the Islanders to do so well against Montreal in the 2 previous seasons in the playoffs, where Montreal couldn't lose. Technically, they couldn't lose. Um, Taking Montreal to 6 games in '77 should have given enough confidence. Hey, we came close last year, but we can do it this year. It's not like the greatest choke of all time, but when the Hockey News, when CBC, when TVR, when the Sporting News, when Sports Illustrated were saying this could be New York's year, the first New York Stanley Cup in literally almost 4 decades since the 1940 Rangers, people were starting to take notice. Having Mike Bossy, a sensational player, Bossy could score blindfolded, covered by 17 defensemen, including 13 from the minors. He could score it any way, and he was a more natural goal scorer than Gretzky was in certain situations. But it's nice that people like Joe Powers and Jimmy Harvey and other Islander fans could say, the 4 straight, but it could have been 6 straight. And as a journalist, I have to tell it like it is, say like Howard Cosell. I saw the Islanders in '78. I saw them win big in certain games. To see him not show up against the Maple Leafs, my God, it's the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is not like playing the Flyers with Bobby Clark and McClish and Barber and all that. Again, this is a team took 6 games, Montreal 6 games a year before, and he didn't have Bossy. He picked up Bossy and he got worse. How is that not a choke? I mean, why do people choke? Why did the Dallas Cowboys choke in those NFC games in the '80s with Danny White? Why did the Boston Red Sox choke many times in the playoffs before David Ortiz showed up? Who knows? But to have Bossy, Gillies, Trottier, all these great players, I basically think Joe Powers can agree when Butch Goring showed up. I think that was the straw he needed to start a drink. But my God, to see the Toronto Maple Leaf fans in 2020 still talking about that series, thinking he won the Stanley Cup just because he bet the Islanders in '78 does not mean you won the Stanley Cup. If anything, you stopped glory from happening too early. And technically, if the like I said, the legends of the NHL were right, you could have won 7 straight cups because the cup against the Oilers in '84, it he bet Gretzky in 83. They were still a consistent team, but that could have been 7 straight cups. Can you imagine 7 straight championships? Just I think the '80 to '83 Islanders said to themselves, we're not going to let 1978 happen again, and even partially 1979. But like I said, if you're at a bar talking about hockey and you're bringing up the Islanders, the first thing you should say, hey, but what about 1978? Because Montreal Canadiens fans, when you talk about '86, people should say to us, what about '89? We choked in '89. We're up 2 games to 1 with game 4 at home. We choked. And choke not a bad way. when people are expecting success and you don't provide success, it sticks in your mind. Green Bay choked in the Super Bowl the second time they were there with Brett Favre. Uh, you might well say the Patriots choked a few times in the Super Bowl, twice against the Giants. The Giants shouldn't have bet them. So every big franchise chokes because that's you play to win the game. You play to win the game. Like Herm Edwards, you don't play it just to play it. You play to win the game. So this is my like revisionist history lesson to these people who think greatest NHL dynasty of all time. Montreal Canadiens number one. Number two is Edmonton. So it's 4 and 5. Number three is Montreal, 56 to 60. Number four is the Islanders, and number five could be any other Montreal Canadian. Why don't we say the Toronto Maple Leafs dynasty of the '60s, the four Keon Cups? That's what Beliveau told me it was called the Keon Cups. So that's your top five. Islanders are not top three. Sorry, I can't do it. Have a good one.